in the Lord. 196.
Dear Lord God, gracious Heavenly Father, Lord, pray over the offering this evening. I pray that the giver has joy and that this money gets used for the missionaries and that it be worked throughout the world as far as wide and save lost souls, Father. Amen. It's in your name, Jesus Christ, that I pray forever. And thank you.
Amen.
Amen.
370. We'll stand for this one, please. 370 is our next one. 370. Now whom I have believed. I know that my God's wondrous grace to me hath made known. For while in Christ in love redeemed me for His own. I know whom I have believed and am persuaded that He is able to keep that which I committed unto Him against that day. I know not how with saving faith to believe in God, or how believing in His word brought peace within my heart. I know whom I have believed and am persuaded that He is able to keep that which I've committed unto Him against that day. I know not how the Spirit moves, convincing men of sin, revealing Jesus through the Word, creating faith in me. I know whom I have believed and am persuaded that He is able to keep that which I've committed unto Him against that day. I know not what of good or ill may be reserved for me. While weary wait for golden days before His face I see. I know whom I have believed and am persuaded that He is able to keep that which I've committed unto Him against that day. I know not when my Lord may come and night or noon may fade, nor if I walk the vale with Him or meet Him in the air. I know whom I have believed and am persuaded that He is able to keep that which I've committed unto Him against that day. Amen to that. 361. So just back a few. 361. When I see the blood. 361. Christ our Redeemer died on the cross, died for the sinner, paid all His own, sprinkled your soul with the blood of the Lamb, and I will pass the Maybe see it. Oh. Next one.
Cow. Into the car. Thank you very much. I was down the back just before church started, and just as Connor was starting the songs, and conversation between Blue and Cottle was taking place, and reminded me of a story I heard this week. There was a man, he played the bagpipes, and anyway, got the call up from this. Here's a life of affliction and sorrows and heartaches, but God is faithful, but there's been wars along the way, and there's scars from battles fought long ago, even all the way back to the youth. And there definitely seems to be that kind of reflective nature in this particular psalm, and I think the longer you go in Christian life in particular, that you will look back and see that there has been battles fought and there's scars, and those that have been even in this church for a long time know that there's battles and there's scars from those battles, and that's the way the Christian life goes. And this psalm is saying, many times have they afflicted me from my youth, may Israel now say. Many a time have they afflicted me from my youth, yet they have not prevailed against me. And he talks about those cords, the ploughs ploughed upon my back, they made long their furrows. Now, when I read that, I do think of Egypt, and I do think of Israel in its infancy, and as a youth, when they were but young as a nation in Egypt, and the taskmasters would beat them and drive them, and they were under bondage. Exodus 1 is one of those places. And it says, and they made their lives bitter with hard bondage in mortar and in brick and all manner of service in the field. All their service wherein they made them serve was with rigor. So they weren't just on some holiday at some spa retreat. They were there at the Nile, and they were working hard with hard bondage and with rigor. In Exodus chapter 2, it says that it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown that he went out unto his brethren and looked on their burdens, and he spied an Egyptian smiting in Hebrew one of his brethren. So there was the smiting, the beating, maybe across their backs to get them to work harder and to do the work and get back in line. This was the life of those Israelites in Egypt. In chapter 5, it says, and the taskmasters hasted them, saying, fulfill your work, your daily tasks, as when there was straw, when the straw was taken away. He says they had to do it, and the taskmasters hasted them. And the officers of the children of Israel, which Pharaoh's taskmasters had set over them, were beaten and demanded, wherefore have ye not fulfilled your task in making bricks, both yesterday and today, as heretofore? So they were beating them and smiting them on their backs, which is sort of maybe the illusion that is saying Israel in its infancy. I have here, I didn't write it down, and turn to Hosea chapter 2, just over to Hosea chapter number 2. There's a passage here that deals with this. Hosea. Oh, where's it gone? Come on. Daniel, Hosea. Hosea chapter number 2, verse 15. It says, and I will give her vineyards from thence in the valley of Achor for a door of hope, and she shall sing there, as in the days of her youth, as in the day when she came up out of the land of Egypt. So there is this illusion here that her infancy and her youth was there in the time of bondage there in Egypt. Look as well while you're in Hosea chapter 11. Hosea chapter number 11. When Israel, chapter 11 verse 1, when Israel was a child, then I loved him and called my son out of Egypt. So there is in Scripture this allusion to Israel being in their youth, when they were young, there in Egypt, and then continuing on. So when he says, many times have they afflicted me from my youth, that Israel has had enemies from the very infancy of that nation as God worked with them, but they had the bondage and their enemies and the afflictions that came, and they had the scars even from that time as a nation. From the time that they were bondage, they had the Passover reminding them of the time that God delivered them out of bondage. And it's not like they ever came out of Egypt and never had any battles after that at all, because all the way through their history there were battles and battles and battles, and even up to this particular time, he's saying now we're still afflicted and the enemy is still on us, but God is faithful and God has broken those cords, but still there are the enemies that are round about us that still want to not bless us and still have that still hate God. And he says that here in verse 4, the Lord is righteous, he cut asunder the cords of the wicked. So the wickedness and the bondage of Egypt has been severed and cut, but still the enemies have still gone on and progressed through their nation. But God has been faithful to them, and they are asking God to take away the enemies and still keep Zion. And when I read this, I can't help but think of the Christian life, because of our own lives, because David says, remember not the sins of my youth, the passions and the sins that are at a young stage in life are oftentimes what God saves us out of. And some people get saved at 20 and 30, and there's this whole mess of sins that have left scars, either physical or emotional scars in a person's life, and God saves them out of them and kind of breaks the bondage of sin. But it's not like the rest of life is now easy. There's still a battle between the flesh and the spirit, where the old man and the new man are still warring and raging within our own flesh and with our own heart, and this battle continues on. And it's what the psalmist is saying. Paul talks about this same battle when he says in Romans 7. Now that's that passage where he says all back and forth, where he says, I want to do this, but I just can't, and I tried, and the things I don't want to do, they're the things I do, and he's just, as you read that, you can't help but sense the frustration within Paul that he has a great desire to live a righteous life, but his flesh is always there battling him wherever he tries to do right. And then he says this in Romans 7 at the very end of it, verse 24, O wretched man that I am, who shall deliver me from the body of death? This death, like this body is just riddled with sin and the flesh and the passions that wage and are completely opposite to the righteousness that the new man that is after the Spirit of God is trying to live in us. Is this war